There's something about the night, when the world quiets down and the shadows stretch longer than they should. It's in those lonely hours, with nothing but the hum of silence and the distant creak of floorboards, that fear takes root. Tonight, we'll explore the stories of 3 people who encountered horrors beyond comprehension, when they were utterly alone at night. The first story. A young woman's peaceful solitude is shattered by an uninvited guest. Or something much worse. Story number 1. The Window Watcher. It started on an ordinary evening. Jenna, a 24-year-old aspiring artist, had recently moved into her tiny 3rd-floor apartment in the heart of the city. She cherished her little haven, especially at night when the chaos outside would subside, leaving her alone with her paints, her music, and her thoughts. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Jenna sat by her desk, her brush gliding over the canvas. The city's dim glow filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. The hum of her favorite playlist filled the room, and for a moment everything felt perfect, until she heard it. Soft tap, tap, tap. She froze, brush suspended mid-air. The sound was faint but deliberate. Her eyes darted to the window. Probably just a tree branch, she muttered, though she knew there were no trees near her building. Shaking off the unease, she resumed painting. But then it came again. Louder. Tap, tap, tap. Her heartbeat quickened. This time, Jenna turned her full attention to the window. The curtains swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. "Hello," she called out, her voice wavering. Silence. Jenna stood, hesitant, and stepped toward the window. She pulled the curtain aside cautiously, her breath fogging the cold glass as she peered outside. The street below was empty, save for a parked car and a flickering street lamp. No one could possibly reach her 3rd-floor window. Yet, as she turned away, a faint movement in the corner of her eye stopped her. There was again tap, tap, tap. This time, the sound was coming from the bottom of the window pane. Jenna's eyes followed the noise, and what she saw made her stomach lurch. A pale hand pressed against the glass. It was unnaturally long, the fingers spindly and trembling. The nails were jagged, almost claw-like, and they scraped lightly against the pane, producing that unnerving tapping sound. Jenna stumbled back, a scream caught in her throat. The hand slid upward slowly, dragging its nails along the glass, leaving faint streaks. Her mind raced. How was this possible? Who could reach her window at this height? She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking. As the operator picked up, Jenna's voice cracked. "Someone's outside my window. Please send help." "Calm down, ma'am," the operator said. "Can you see the person clearly?" Jenna looked back at the window, but the hand was gone. There was nothing there. It was... "I swear there was someone," she stammered. The operator assured her that a patrol car would be sent, and Jenna, still trembling, hung up. She locked the windows, pulled the curtains tightly shut, and sat in the middle of her living room, her eyes darting around the room. Minutes turned into hours. The police arrived, searched the premises, and found no signs of forced entry or any disturbances outside. "It's probably just your nerves," one officer suggested kindly. Moving to a new place can be stressful. But Jenna knew what she saw. The night gets darker. Determined not to let fear control her, Jenna tried to go about her life. For the next few days, she avoided the window, keeping the curtains closed at all times. But the unease lingered. Then one evening she heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it came from the bathroom mirror. Jenna froze in place. The air in her apartment felt heavier, colder. Slowly, she made her way to the bathroom. The door was ajar, and she could see her reflection faintly in the dim light. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from behind the mirror. She hesitated before reaching out to touch it, her fingers trembling. As soon as her fingertips met the glass, a loud bang came from behind it, as though someone or something had slammed against it. Jenna screamed and bolted out of the bathroom, grabbing her phone. She called her best friend Mia, begging her to come over. By the time Mia arrived, Jenna was in tears, clutching a kitchen knife for protection. "What happened?" Mia asked, looking around the apartment. There's something. Someone. It's not just the window anymore. Jenna cried, recounting everything. Mia, skeptical but concerned, stayed the night to comfort her. The revelation. The two stayed up, talking and watching movies to distract Jenna. Hours passed without incident, and Mia began to relax. Maybe it was just your imagination, Mia said gently. But as the clock struck 3 a.m., the tapping returned. This time it wasn't coming from the window or the bathroom. It was coming from inside the closet. Both women turned toward the sound, their faces pale. The closet door, slightly ajar, creaked as if nudged from within. Jenna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, it's not possible. Mia, trying to stay brave, grabbed a flashlight and approached the closet. Stay behind me, she whispered. She flung the door open. The closet was empty. But as the flashlight beam moved across the walls, they saw it. Scratches, deep and deliberate, etched into the wood. The words read, I see you. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping Mia inside. Jenna screamed, pulling at the door, but it wouldn't budge. From within, Mia's terrified screams echoed, followed by a deafening silence. When the door finally gave way, Mia was gone. All that remained was the flashlight, flickering on the closet floor. Jenna never saw Mia again. The police searched for weeks, but no trace of her was ever found. Haunted by the incident, Jenna left the apartment and moved far away. But the nightmares followed her. Dreams of tapping sounds, pale hands, and the words I see you etched into every surface. She never stayed alone at night again. But the question remains. What was waiting behind her window? And where did Mia go? Story number 2. Echoing Steps. It was a late autumn evening when Alex, a university student living off campus, decided to stay back in the library to finish an important paper. The campus library was sprawling, with endless rows of bookshelves, dimly lit corridors, and a haunting silence that amplified every sound. By the time Alex finished, the clock had just struck midnight. Outside, the wind howled, and dry leaves swirled across the deserted campus. Alex zipped up his jacket, slung his bag over his shoulder, and began the short walk to his apartment. As he strolled past the library's tall, arched windows, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He stopped, peering inside. The interior was dark, except for the faint glow of emergency lights. He saw nothing unusual. Shaking his head, he muttered, "Too many late nights." But as he turned away, he heard it, echoing steps. The first encounter. The sound was faint at first, almost drowned out by the rustling leaves. It wasn't unusual to hear footsteps on campus, but these were odd. They didn't match his pace. Stopping mid-stride, Alex turned around. The pathway behind him stretched empty, illuminated only by dim streetlights. "Hello," he called out, his voice hesitant. Silence. Shrugging it off, he resumed walking, his pace quickening. But the moment he moved, the footsteps resumed as well, faint, deliberate, and growing louder. Alex's heart began to race. He stopped again, and the steps ceased instantly. This time he didn't turn around. His grip on his bag tightened as a wave of unease washed over him. The campus, usually comforting in its familiarity, now felt alien and menacing. "I'm just tired," he whispered to himself, breaking into a brisk walk. But no matter how fast he moved, the footsteps persisted, maintaining the same deliberate rhythm. The apartment. When Alex finally reached his apartment, he slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning against the cold wooden surface as he tried to steady his breathing. The tiny one-bedroom apartment was his sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't touch him. He turned on all the lights, the brightness pushing back the darkness that seemed to cling to him. After a long shower, Alex began to feel a little more like himself. He rationalized the footsteps as his mind playing tricks on him, a product of stress and sleep deprivation. Settling onto the couch with his laptop, he tried to distract himself with his favorite show. The comforting sounds of dialogue and laughter filled the room, drowning out the silence. Until he heard it again. Thump, thump, thump. It was soft but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps. Alex froze, his eyes darting to the front door. The sound was coming from the hallway outside his apartment. He muted the show, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped directly in front of his door. A shadow appeared under the gap, and for a moment, Alex thought he saw it linger, shifting slightly as though someone or something was standing there waiting. Summoning his courage, he approached the peephole and peered through. There was no one there. The persistent sound. Alex tried to shake it off, but the unease lingered. He double-checked the locks, closed the curtains, and even placed a chair under the doorknob for extra security. But the footsteps didn't stop. Throughout the night, they echoed in the hallway, soft, slow, and deliberate. They would stop for minutes at a time, only to resume again, always pausing just outside his door. By 3 a.m., Alex couldn't take it anymore. He flung the door open, shouting, "Who's there?" The hallway was empty. But before he could close the door, a cold breeze brushed past him, making him shiver. He stepped back into the apartment, slamming the door shut, and locked it again. That's when he noticed it. The room felt wrong. The air was heavier, colder. He glanced around, his eyes landing on the window. It was wide open. Alex's pulse quickened. He was sure he had locked it earlier. "Maybe I forgot," he muttered, though the words felt hollow. He approached the window cautiously and closed it, locking it firmly. But as he turned away, he noticed something on the floor, a trail of wet footprints leading from the window to the center of the room. The stranger in the room. Panic surged through Alex as he followed the footprints. They stopped abruptly in the middle of the living room, disappearing as though the intruder had vanished into thin air. Grabbing his phone, Alex called the campus security office, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. The officer on the other end assured him that someone would be sent over to check on him. But even as he hung up, Alex felt a gnawing sense of dread. He could feel eyes on him, watching from somewhere unseen. And then he heard it. Faint whisper. The sound was so soft that at first, he thought it was his imagination. But as it grew louder, the words became clearer. "Why did you run?" Alex's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't coming from the hallway or outside. It was inside the apartment. He spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. His breathing grew ragged as the whispering continued, echoing from every corner. "Why did you run?" Alex backed into the corner of the room, clutching his phone like a lifeline. The final moments. When campus security arrived, they found Alex huddled in the corner, pale and shaking. He recounted everything, but the guards found no sign of forced entry, no wet footprints, and no one in the apartment. "You've been under a lot of stress," one of them said sympathetically. "Try to get some rest." They left, and Alex was alone again. That night, the footsteps didn't return. For the first time in hours, the apartment was silent. But as Alex lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then he heard it, a faint creak coming from under the bed. His heart pounded as he slowly leaned over the edge to look. Beneath the bed, a pair of glowing eyes stared back at him. The last thing Alex saw was a pale hand reaching out, pulling him into the darkness. Alex's disappearance remains a mystery to this day. His apartment was found empty, with no signs of struggle, though his laptop was still playing the same muted show. Some say he simply vanished. Others believe he was taken by whatever was following him that night. But one thing is certain. The footsteps, they never truly left. Story number 3. The Window That Watched. Catherine lived alone in an old Victorian house she had inherited from her late grandmother. The house stood at the edge of town, surrounded by a sprawling garden that had once been vibrant but now lay neglected, with overgrown weeds and twisted vines. It was the perfect house for someone like Catherine, a freelance writer who valued solitude and quiet. She adored the creaking wooden floors, the ornate moldings, and the large, arched windows that allowed natural light to pour in during the day. But as much as Catherine loved the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was always watching her. The uneasy beginning. The feeling began subtly. She'd catch her reflection in the glass of the large living room window and feel as though it wasn't quite right. The reflection seemed delayed, or perhaps it lingered just a second too long after she moved. At night she would draw the curtains tightly, but even then she couldn't shake the sensation that something, or someone, was on the other side staring in. "Stop being ridiculous," she'd mutter to herself, trying to laugh it off. But the unease deepened one particularly cold autumn evening. Catherine was sitting at her desk, typing away, when she felt it, a chill creeping across the back of her neck. The window to her left rattled slightly, as though someone were gently tapping on the glass. She froze. The wind outside was still, and there were no branches close enough to hit the window. Slowly she turned her head, her heart thudding in her chest. The window was empty, the curtains billowing softly in the breeze. She hurried over to shut it, securing the latch tightly. But as she stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the condensation on the glass, were 4 long streaks, like finger marks, dragging down the window pane. The presence. From that night on, the house didn't feel like it belonged to Catherine anymore. The noises started first. Soft creaks in the floorboards when no one was walking, the faint sound of whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and most unsettling of all, the rhythmic tapping on the windows. Every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the tapping would begin. At first, Catherine thought it might be an animal, but when she peered outside, there was never anything there. Just the darkness of the garden and the faint glow of the moon. Her friends dismissed her concerns. "It's an old house," they said. "Of course it's going to make noises." But Catherine knew this was different. A shadow. One night, as she lay in bed, the tapping came again. This time it was louder, more insistent. She sat up, clutching the blanket tightly, her eyes fixed on the window across the room. The curtains were drawn, but she could see the faint outline of a shadow behind them, a tall, looming figure standing just on the other side of the glass. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The tapping stopped abruptly. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, Catherine got out of bed and approached the window. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the curtains aside. Nothing. The garden was empty. But just as she was about to turn away, her eyes caught something in the reflection, a face staring back at her from inside the room. She spun around, but the room was empty. The escalation. From that night forward, the presence grew bolder. Objects would move on their own. Books falling off shelves, chairs shifting slightly when she wasn't looking, and once, a vase of flowers flew across the room, shattering against the wall. The whispering became louder, almost taunting. It always seemed to say the same thing. "Look outside." Catherine stopped sleeping in her bedroom, opting instead to stay in the living room where there were fewer windows. She kept every light in the house on, but even the brightness couldn't chase away the oppressive darkness she felt pressing in on her. And the tapping, it never stopped. The stranger. One particularly stormy night, Catherine sat curled up on the couch, her laptop perched on her knees. The rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. She was halfway through an email to her best friend, describing the strange occurrences, when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. The tapping began almost immediately, louder and more frantic than ever before. She pointed the light at the nearest window, and her breath hitched. A figure stood there, pressed against the glass. Its face was obscured, but its hand was raised, tapping rhythmically. Catherine screamed, dropping the phone. The light spun across the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. When she finally picked it up and turned it back to the window, the figure was gone. The revelation. The next morning, Catherine decided she couldn't take it anymore. She packed a bag and drove to the local library to research the history of the house, desperate for answers. What she found made her blood run cold. The house had belonged to a reclusive man named Thomas Whitaker, who was known for his obsession with windows. He believed they were portals to another world and spent years documenting figures he claimed to see staring back at him. Neighbors reported hearing strange tapping sounds coming from the house, even after Whitaker disappeared without a trace. Catherine read through his journal, which detailed his descent into madness. The final entry was the most chilling. They watch me through the windows. They want me to join them. The final night. Determined to put an end to the nightmare, Catherine returned to the house that evening. She poured salt along the windowsills, burned sage, and recited every protection ritual she could find online. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. But as the clock struck 2:13 a.m., the tapping resumed. It was louder, more aggressive, shaking the very glass of the windows. "Leave me alone," Catherine screamed, clutching a kitchen knife as she backed into a corner. The lights flickered violently, and the room grew unbearably cold. The whispering returned, louder and more insistent. "Look outside." Against her better judgment, Catherine moved to the nearest window and pulled back the curtain. What she saw would haunt her forever. Dozens of faces stared back at her, pale, lifeless, their eyes hollow and filled with malice. They pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in unison as they whispered, "Join us." The window shattered, and the darkness poured in like a living thing, swallowing her whole. Catherine's disappearance remains unsolved. The house stands empty now, its windows boarded up, but locals swear they still hear the tapping at night. Some say it's the wind. Others believe it's Catherine, forever trapped in the house, staring out from the windows she once feared. But those who dare to get close insist they've seen her face in the glass, mouthing the same words. "Look outside."